Hello, my name's Tommy Whitelaw. I'm the National Lead for Caring and Outreach at the Health and Social Care Alliance Scotland. And the warmest welcome to everyone listening to the latest in our Alliance Live series. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to a great friend and colleague, Shaun Mayer, Strategic Advisor on Person-Centred Care and Quality Improvement at the Scottish Government. He's a Principal Educator at NHS Education for Scotland and chair of the What Matters to You Scotland Steering Group, which will be the subject of our conversation today. Welcome, Shaun, and can I start by asking how you are today?
Thanks, Tommy. Yeah, I'm pretty good. The sun's shining outside. It's pretty chilly, but I managed to have a walk this morning, and I've been moving around, which is sometimes something you forget to do these days when you tend to be stuck in your house a lot. So no, I'm good.
So today, Shaun, we'll be chatting a lot about what this conversation, this What Matters to You conversation, there is a kind of What Matters to You movement and a What Matters to You day and much more over the course of the next 20 minutes or so. Just to begin, can you share some background on how the What Matters to You movement came about, or a wee bit of background about What Matters to You?
We started to use the phrase What Matters to You quite a lot after around about 2012, but there's always been people working in healthcare, in social care, and every other sector under the sun who believe it's important to focus on the things that really matter in life. It hasn't always been framed as what matters to you, but the core values that are at the heart of what we mean when we say what matters to you, have a focus on what matters to you, have always been there. That focus on people, on meaning, on listening, on doing the right thing, on helping. You know, that there has always been that. Those things have always been there. They're innate to the human experience for most of us. So and there are sometimes it's easier than others to focus on those things that matter so much to us all. So then the What Matters to You movement came around because we were conscious that it was perhaps getting a bit more difficult to keep that focus. So, you know, for example, we've been trying things in Scotland again before the days of what matters to you. That phrase, like the Alliance was involved in work, for example, like the Self-Management Fund, the Long-Term Conditions Collaborative. These efforts, these projects, for want of a better description, they were all about focus on people, relationships, and the things that really matter, and helping people to live the best possible life they can, whatever the challenges are that they face, kind of thing. But in 2012, a lady called Susan Edgman-Levitan and Michael Barry published a paper called Shared Decision Making, the Pinnacle of Patient Care. So it was with a healthcare focus. And it was talking about this idea or this approach in healthcare called shared decision making. An equivalent in social care might be personal outcomes, you might call it. And what they were describing was the impact and the importance of being intentional about focusing on an individual's preferences and allowing those to come to bear on any course of medical treatment or care. Because when that happens, there's a number of important things that it impacts on. So safety is one in particular, but also generally on the quality and efficiency of the support that's provided. And that applies across the board. You know, when you understand what people really need and want and you tailor things to that demand, then you'll get better outcomes, generally speaking. And they framed it as they said, well, you know, what this shared decision-making thing is about really at the end of the day is about shifting the focus from what's the matter to what matters to you. Yeah. And if we can do that, then we'll go down this different road where we'll manage to achieve, hopefully, a better focus on people's preferences, a more collaborative approach to healthcare. So that, you know, the focus was healthcare, but this is equally applicable, the same type of thing happening in social care and all sorts of other sectors too.
And we'll be capturing a wee bit more of what's happened since the beginning or the article that you mentioned there. Within your work that I follow avidly, you speak a lot about taking the time to ask people what matters to them. Why is it important to ask each other, whether that be a colleague or someone that we're caring for? And I suppose a wee add-on to that is, can you tell us a wee bit more along with that, and the importance of listening and creating the space to listen to each other?
To go back to front and answer that last bit first, perhaps, with the sort of industrialization of healthcare in particular, but also social care, you know, find the principles of sort of industrial management being brought into social care as well, you know, like timed visits, you know, that type of thing. You know, scan in, scan out, get the division of labor, get the lowest paid person to do the simplest task, and you know, only bring the more expensive people in where you really have to. Actually, what we've realized, and still haven't managed to shake it off yet, but what we've realized is that that's actually false economy. That's false economy. You spend more money in people-focused industries, if you like healthcare, social care, when you start to try and treat people like you would treat something being constructed on a production line, because that's where those principles come from. And people are far more complex than that. So you need a more nuanced approach. And so what we found with those types of industrialized approaches, they stripped out the opportunity that people perhaps once did more naturally, was to sort of ask the question, what are the things that are important to you? What can we do together here? What would be a good outcome for you? These types of what matters to you questions. People felt time pressured maybe, and other things were prioritized, which meant that the space to listen was squeezed. And actually, you know, there's a saying in the world of quality improvement that a bad system beats a good person every time. So no matter the intention of the individual, actually it got more and more difficult, or was getting more and more difficult to have that people focus. And so what we do with the What Matters to You movement at the heart of that is actually design some time back in, make that time. You know, if the system is such that we have to specify what the, you know, the key elements of someone's care is, then in the same way we say, well, they have to have their medicines at this time, this time, and this time, we should be saying, we've got to make space to listen. So where is that space to listen? And it might need to be flexible, and it might need to be at different spots. I'm not saying we should be prescriptive about that, but that it should be there is the point. And that in the busyness and the complexity of the modern world, we need to make sure it's there and be very intentional about that. So the reason why then it's important is because until you understand what it is that's important to that person, what their preferences are, you know, what it is that makes a good day for them, and what it is that makes a bad day, and whether that be a colleague, or whether, you know, the focus mainly of this conversation, you know, to people who are perhaps being supported or cared for. Once you understand what you need, well, before we get to that, first thing is it actually establishes a bit of human connection, and that then builds trust. That's the fundamental foundation from which everything else flows. So that's the first point. To just stop and connect and listen properly to someone is a very trust building practice to have, and we know that trust is absolutely fundamental. So once you've got that trust, that's the foundation from which everything else goes. So that's the first thing that why it's important. It builds trust and connection. The second thing is, when you ask the question, what are the things that are important to you, you then know what you need to do. So, and actually it might be nothing, or it might be so difficult that you don't know what to do, but the very fact you've listened is important. That's an action in itself, to listen. But also by implication, you now know what you don't need to do or what you shouldn't do. And that's a bit of a challenge actually for healthcare professionals, social care professionals, because sometimes there's things we like to do or we think people need and want. And actually, when we have this conversation with people, we discover actually they don't want that thing at all. They want something else, or they don't want anything. They just want to be listened to. So that might mean sometimes we have to give up cherished ways of working, or things that we like to do, that we were trained to do, that make us that we feel make us who we are. So those are the two main points there. It builds trust. Why it's important. It builds trust, whether that's with a client or a patient, or with a colleague, asking what matters. And the second thing is it helps us to really understand what it is that's going to add value for this person. What are the things that we need to do for this person, and then what are the things we don't need to do. So it helps to understand the true demand that's in the system, rather than the lots of demand that we generate or that we think is there when we work in our traditional ways of working.
Can I ask you, just as a wee add-on to that, do you think some people are concerned about taking the time to ask what matters to you, because they might have a preconception that people might ask for the world, and we know that's not strictly true, is it? You know, that people might ask for lots of things they can't give or support with. Do you think that can be a barrier sometimes to taking the time to ask people that concerned about the answer? Yeah,
for sure. I think so. I think people are so busy, you know, we're so, you know, and we are stretched, providing, you know, a lot of public services are very stretched. And so you think, well, if I ask this question, you know, I'm not going to be able to do what the person wants, or what if I'm not able to do what the person says they need, or what the thing that matters to them. I'm going to feel terrible. They're going to be disappointed because I haven't been able to do it. They're going to think, well, what's the point in even asking if you're not going to do anything about it? But actually, the reality is that as you've said, it's not that sometimes it's the case. Actually, the vast majority of times, people will not ask for the earth. People are very, you know, very reasonable and sensible about what they ask for and what their expectations are. So that's the first point. You know, people don't generally ask for the Rolls Royce. You know? Yeah. They just want a bit of help. They just want a listening ear. And the second thing, well, what if they do ask for something that's really difficult or challenging, or tell you about something that's really difficult or challenging? Well, don't forget that listening is in itself an intervention. You know. So yes. To be honest and say, oh my goodness, that sounds really challenging. I have no idea how it is you've been able to cope to this point. Yeah. Let alone how we're going to go forwards. But let's start thinking about how we could do that. What would be the first step, type of thing, you know? So I think it's about that honesty, you know, and that's again, talking about the trust element, you know, huge factor.
You know, I've been doing a lot of reflection, you know, and back in when mum living with dementia, myself as a son and a carer. And to me, the better outcomes always came back to the moment I felt listened to. And it wasn't always about the do bit. When I trace them back, it's those moments where I can trace them back to that moment that someone really took time to listen, that changed so many things for us along the way. It wasn't really always about what they did. They can't always do everything you're asked, but there's something magical, I think, about that listening moment when I've personally reflected back on it.
I can think of a similar example, and I suppose, you know, it will have been the same for you by what you're describing there, that actually nothing changed. You just had a human being connected with you. Yeah. I can remember with a family situation, a member of the family was, you know, terminally ill with cancer. You know, there was not really anything to do. We went to a healthcare consultation, and all the person did was listen. Yeah. They just listened. They didn't change anything. It was my father, went in, you know, fed up, you know, really depressed, feeling hopeless. Came out, nothing had changed about his situation. No treatment had changed, no prognostic changes, nothing was going to be. All that had happened was someone listened to him for 20 minutes. And he came out with a spring in his step. Oh, it was really good, you know, and he probably lived long. He probably lived a bit longer as a result of that one consultation. So it's interesting that just, you know, to be heard like that is can be really helpful for people, especially when the situations are very, very challenging and difficult.
Yeah, I'm with you. There's something kind of magical and incredible and beautiful about those listening connections and someone taking the time to ask. As you know, Shaun, I've shared the platform with you in quite a few occasions, and I lovingly lift lots of your key messages during my own talks, which I'm really honoured to do, and trying to get some of these key messages out. Can you share maybe an example of what matters to you in practice, you know?
My world has been the world of healthcare, so that's where a lot of the examples come from, but not exclusively so. So, for example, the work that Jennifer Rogers has done with in children's services, in inpatient, children's hospital wards, where the children would come in and be given a piece of paper and some crayons and stickers and would make a poster about what mattered to them and which would go above their bed. So very simple thing that was fun to do, that became part of the process. The ward round would come round and they would look at the What Matters to You poster together with the child, and what a great thing for the child was, because often, they're with the best will in the world, sometimes it might be sort of talking over a child's head, and you might not connect with the personhood of that small person that's there as much. And so that's a nice example, and spread to lots of other places beyond that. So for example, an example in older people's care, in a sort of dementia unit, where a similar type of thing was done. And some of the stories that came from that made a huge difference in the care, both just the experience of the care for the individual, but also the actual quality of the care, knowing just important little things about that individual and what was, I like to listen to Smooth FM, and I don't like X and I love Y, and so on. Those types of things. The story about, somebody who was a postman who got out of his bed got up every morning at 4 a.m. because that was his job, and as an older person with dementia was still doing that because that's what he'd done all his life. He wasn't getting up in the night and wandering around. He was actually doing his daily routine, so knowing that about him was hugely beneficial to the team and to him. So those are kind of healthcare examples, but we've got examples from schools, where people have done that, schools and colleges, nurseries, some great examples from care homes, Tommy, which you've had a lot to do with the What Matters to You trees, where a lovely sort of interactive piece of art where people can put leaves on a tree or clouds on a skyscape of the things that matter to them. So sometimes having a sort of fun activity, which can be a bit of a one-off sometimes, which then generates improvement activity, is quite good. So you can have it as a routine thing, like Jennifer's example with the children. You can have it as a one-off sort of activity to get things going. And other examples of just threading it into daily work, so that there's a reminder, a prompt, in the busyness of daily life, to stop and focus on these really important things first, and then the other stuff flows after that, the sort of more routine and technical things that we often have to do as well. So just thinking about what that looks like for you, and those examples are nice ones from healthcare, but there's lots. If you go on the whatmatterstoyou.scot website and the What Matters to You World website, which we'll leave links to, I think, at the end of the podcast, you can see lots of different examples of how people have done this all over the world.
It's just come into my mind because along with yourself, we launched What Matters to You at the Housing Association in Glasgow.
That's right.
And we both spent time with lots of families from the community who were felt quite isolated. And they'd created a little What Matters to You art room for them. That was a brilliant thing. Yeah.
There seems to be an arts and crafts theme to this. But there's something therapeutic about that, isn't it? It's helpful, can be helpful to just have a different medium through which you do some of this sometimes.
I think we both left with a wee smile in our heart that day, and because it's quite local to me, I've been back to visit them a few times since. From a kind of, I know quality improvements, one of your specialities as well. I share this message at lots of my talks, and people do get in touch with me after it. They're really keen and they have these good intentions to turn into actions. But the question is, what's the best starting point for people working in a busy healthcare environment, whether that be a busy ward? Lots of people I've got back in touch with you to say, I really want to take this forward. Where do I start? Or how do I start? Or how do I measure it? Do you have any tips for anyone who might be listening?
There's lots of quality improvement resources on the NHS Education website in the QI zone, for some technical tools and things, if you like, there. But the first point would be to just start. do something. So don't think you have to do this everywhere all at once. So if you feel a bit overwhelmed by that, think about, well, what's the first, where could I do this? Who is there? One person, one colleague, one client, one patient, one child that I could have just try this with, and see what happens. And you'll make mistakes. Sometimes it'll go back, and that's a test, and think, oh, okay, then reflect on, well, what went well there and what could have been better. So what am I going to do differently next time? Try it again. And then you'll get to a point where you find something that works, consistently and reliably. And so maybe you can do it with 4 or 5 people, and maybe then you can do it with everybody. So that's the first thing, is just to start and to test. Have a look at the QI zone on the NES website, on the NHS Education website, Scotland. You get some good tips on how to test change ideas there. Collecting measurement, well, in this case, it would be, well, what happened? It might be very qualitative for this type of thing initially, certainly. What did the person say? Did they seem to understand the question when I asked it? Did I have to clarify it? That type of thing. So those measurements might be quite qualitative and experiential. The other thing to think about is what's your sphere of control, So don't try and do this somewhere where you haven't got control. And I don't mean that in a sort of an authoritarian sense. I just mean, where can you try it? Don't say, well, I'm working as a social worker for this children's home, for these looked after children, but I want to do it in all children's homes. Well, that's probably going to be very difficult. How about you do it with one child in the home where you work every day? That would be a good place to start. Just start. So that would be my, so think about what your sphere of influence and control is, where you could do it, and then think about starting nice and small and just try it and reflect each time you try it, and go around a cycle of reflection and adaptation. Some of you might be familiar with the PDSA cycle. That's a good model to use to think about when you're testing new ideas. And there's some really helpful 3 questions that go with the PDSA cycle, which can really help you with this. So certainly there's kind of some methods and tools that can help you with this, but the first most important point is just to start, and to start where you've got a bit of ability to control the circumstances.
We'll put links up along with this podcast to some of the support and that you've mentioned. Thank you for that, Shaun. So we started off speaking about how the kind of the conversation or movement, whatever the description be, started. We now have a What Matters to You Scotland group that you chair. I'm very glad to sit on that. Thank you. As well as a What Matters to You World Steering Group, which I think is incredible progress. It feels like incredible progress. Can you tell us a wee bit about both those groups and who's involved and what kind of things happen within those groups?
It links back to that first question you asked about where it all began in some way. And a lot of people read that paper, that first paper that I talked about, Shared Decision Making, the Pinnacle of Healthcare. But one of the people who read it was a lady called Maureen Bizignano, who's a kind of a great sort of healthcare leader, influencer from the US. And a number of us were from Scotland were at a quality improvement conference where she stood up and gave a presentation where she challenged us. She told us about this reframing of the healthcare interaction, and challenged us to go away and, like I just did there, go away, try it with one person and see what happens. And a number of us from Scotland, also a good friend from Norway who was there, did the same. And we went off and we tried to have these conversations and found sometimes it worked well and it was difficult. Other times it was very difficult. And we learned a lot in our own areas of practice at that time. But we stayed connected because we kind of had this shared experience. And from that, one of our friend in Norway, Anders Vega, he came up with the idea, why don't we have a day where we just all focus on this and have some fun and share the experience. So he came up with the idea of having a What Matters to You Day in Norway, and then invited Scotland to take part, and we shared the invitation much more widely. And to cut a long story short, you know, the last occasion we had more than 40 countries participating in What Matters to You Day. Now, obviously, this isn't about just doing this on one day. The day is about a celebration. If you're already doing it, it's about an opportunity to promote more widely. It can be, you know, whatever you need it to be, kind of thing. But one of the things that having the day has done is it's actually created the opportunity to connect a global network of people all working on this. So, you know, from Brazil to New Zealand, from Canada and the US to Afghanistan, Pakistan, Malaysia, India, you know, right across the world, we've got people participating. Now it's thin, it's wide, but it's not deep. So it's there's a cohort of people all over the world who want to do this and want to do it, recognize the importance of doing it and the impact and the benefit it can have for everybody. Those people are now connected globally through the What Matters to You World Network, which meets monthly on a virtual call, and coordinates and coordinates some activities, but also shares learning principally. And we have our own Scottish What Matters to You network, which you referred to, Tommy, which has got people from social care, people from third sector organisations, education, and you know, nice cross section. Could be wider, but we're working on that. And what we do is we coordinate some Scottish activities. So, you know, we have our What Matters to You Day in Scotland, and we have stickers and posters and those types of things. And then we usually share those experiences afterwards and collect some case studies and stories about things that happened. And it's great. It's been a very good thing. It's definitely generated some momentum and sort of cohesiveness. With relatively little resource, just people who are interested and motivated to make a difference. So that's been great. That's been really great to be part of.
And it'll be June the 9th this year, June the 9th for What Matters to You Day this year. Yeah. And we'll put the links up to both the What Matters to You Scotland website and the What Matters to You World to go along with this podcast. And there's a wee hashtag for social media as well, hashtag WMTY21, where you can see most days people sharing experiences. Shaun, I've really enjoyed today's conversation with you, and I'm grateful to work beside you and share a platform with you on many occasions, and to share some of your key messages at my own talks as well. Can we finish, as we've been speaking about What Matters to You today, with one final question? Can I ask you today, Shaun, what matters to you?
First of all, to say it's been great. Thanks for the opportunity to have the conversation, Tommy. That's been great too. And I think that one of the good things about this work is that sort of most of the people who do this do it as a hobby as well as their day job, you know, and that's something that's quite special. That matters to me, being part of something like that, you know, because people, you know, when people are involved in this, they're involved because they really want to be and they believe in it. So that's a great thing. But like, I suppose many people, top of my list would be my family. You know, my wife and my children are very important to me. And if anything, if I'm facing challenges in life, that's where I get most of my support from. But just day to day as well, generally, you know. I love spending time outdoors, riding my bike, walking in the hills. And when it comes to work, you know, I love doing this sort of work that's really meaningful, makes a difference, and that really matters. And I always had that in great abundance. I worked as a nurse for more than 20 years in the NHS. You had that in great abundance every day handed to you on a plate, you know, in a job like that. You could make a difference and feel that difference. A little bit more challenging when you move away from those types of roles sometimes to find that connection. But, you know, I still enjoy it in my teaching role and being involved with people like you who are so generous with their time and make such a difference in people's lives every day. So those are the things that matter to me.
Well, thank you, Shaun. As always, I really enjoy the conversations that we have together. And thanks to everyone for listening today for the latest in our Alliance Live series. And today's was on What Matters to You. Thank you.